Hey friends, welcome to Healedish, the podcast where we talk about the messy, chaotic, sometimes funny, sometimes heartbreaking stories that shape us. I'm Jubilee Dawn, and a little bit about me. I'm a writer, a content creator, and somebody who's walked through religious trauma, domestic violence, divorce, and rebuilding my life from the ground up. I started sharing my story on social media in 2024, and finding a community of others who have been through the unthinkable has been so healing for me. This podcast, Healedish, was born from a deep belief that it is okay to be a work in progress. This is a safe place where we get real about what it really looks like to heal. I'm so glad that you're here. Let's get started. Okay, guys, so jumping in, I am going to be very honest that I recorded an entire first episode of this podcast. I was hoping that the first episode would be me just coming on here and telling you guys my story. I know that I have shared my story a few times. I have been on the Something Was Wrong podcast, the Dating Detectives podcast, and I also have done a Did I Marry a Psychopath series in, I think it was 57 parts on TikTok. So I have shared it a few times before, but my hope is to come on here and share some details that I've never shared with you guys before. That way you can get an even better glimpse of the craziness that led up to me being with Ted. But I recorded the entire first episode and I was trying my hardest to fit it into an hour and a half. And I feel like I rushed through so much that I actually am not happy with that episode. I decided to just re-record all of it because I've shared my story on other podcasts before. I just kind of felt like, should I not tell the full picture on my own podcast? Would that not be the entire point? So I am going to just tell you all of the details and really get into it. So I do not know how many parts this is going to be. It might be 2 or 3 parts. But my goal is just to really let you guys into what it was like to join a cult at the age of 17 and where that crazy path took me. So you might be wondering, how does someone get involved in a cult? So I did want to tell you guys a little bit about my background because I was not raised in this. I fully just found this thing on my own and decided to jump in. So I was going through a really hard time in high school. I had been severely depressed due to some abuse that I had suffered when I was younger. And I was really processing through that in therapy. And I was just not doing well. I ended up becoming homeschooled, I think at the age of 16. So I ended up finishing my last 2 years of high school at home. I really tried to pitch it to my parents that you should just let me be homeschooled my last 2 years. I can get started on my life early because I was always a very good student. I had almost straight A's throughout my time in school. So I told them, please just let me do this. I promise to be responsible. I will graduate early and I just want to get a job and get my life started because I was just feeling so depressed. It was hard for me to even go to school. So they agreed. And during that time, it really didn't help. I just continued to get worse and worse. And I was in therapy and just really trying to unpack all of this. And it ended up leading to me being hospitalized. And I believe that was, that was December of 2011. So I was hospitalized for, I believe, 9 days leading into the new year. And just in a really dark spot. So when I got out of the hospital, obviously in my mind, I had it, I'm going to go to the hospital and I'm going to be healed. I'm going to feel completely better. They're going to get me on this medication and hopefully this will just fix me. Unfortunately, that is not how post-traumatic stress disorder works. So I came out still feeling pretty hopeless. And my parents had this idea that I should go visit my brother out in Abilene because he was going to ACU, Abilene Christian University out in Texas. And they told me that maybe I should go visit him because I had a lot of family there. I had my cousins. One of my really good friends who was dating my brother was out there as well. So we had this idea that maybe I should just go visit them because I'd already graduated early and I could just spend a couple weeks there and take a mini vacation with people who really loved me. So while I'm out there, this is where enter the cult. I ended up going to this conference and it was at a normal church. I thought that this was just a normal non-denominational church. And my brother told me that there was going to be a conference and that we should all go. So we ended up going to this conference, and little did I know they were going to be having a guest speaker named Heidi Baker. So if you are not familiar with Heidi Baker, she really just got me into this crazy sector of Christianity. But she is a woman who has a ministry out in Mozambique, and she has all of these children who call her mother. So she has lots of orphanages, and she is just dedicated, or this is what I'm told, dedicated her life to providing for them and to changing the world. And she also goes and does these conferences all throughout the world, and she believes in healing. So she starts to get on stage, and she's really in tune with the spirit. She's speaking in a very spiritual voice, and she starts to tell us that she sees miracles happen all of the time out in Africa. And she was saying, I have seen people be raised from the dead. I have seen bones be healed in an instant. And she really opened up my eyes to this sector of Christianity, because growing up in my church, of course, we pray for people who are sick. You know, if you have a family member in the hospital, yes, you are going to pray that they get better, but it was not something tangible. It was not something that we thought, okay, I'm going to pray for you right now, and all of a sudden your sickness is going to leave you. And she was speaking about it as if it was this very magical Harry Potter kind of thing. And she is on stage, and then she starts speaking in tongues, which I had heard of before just being a Christian, but I never went to a church that was charismatic, which is what they call this sector of Christianity. So towards the end of her speaking, she said, I heard God say that he is healing PTSD tonight. And if you have PTSD, I want you to come to the front. I'm going to pray for you, and you are going to be fully healed of PTSD. It's hard looking back on this moment, because I don't even know what I really think about it now, but I really felt like this was for me. I thought that God had brought me to Abilene to be in this room with this random woman, and that he was essentially calling me out by name. It felt like, well, I shouldn't really be here. It's a miracle that I'm even here. So I went down to the front of the sanctuary fully believing that I was going to be healed of PTSD. And I don't remember much. I just remember getting on the floor and kneeling down and feeling what I thought was the presence of God. And I was crying, and I had full faith that I was going to be healed from PTSD. And when I got up, I felt like a new person. I went and I ran to my family. I told them, guys, I'm healed. I'm healed of PTSD. And what is crazy, because I do want to point out some of the things that really validated my belief in this culty sector, is I thought that I was getting signs that all of this was real. So I'm not going to try to diminish that. I'm not going to try to explain it away, because I don't really know. But what I do know is that I had been having nightmares almost every night for years from my sexual abuse. And when I got prayer from Heidi Baker, I had no more nightmares for years after that. And I just felt happy. I felt like this weight had been lifted off of me, and I had been struggling with self-harm for so many years, and I never self-harmed again. And to me, I didn't know how to explain that other than God himself healed me through this woman. And all I knew is that I wanted to know who this woman was and where do I sign up? Essentially, like, where do I sign up? How do I become her? How do I help other people who were like me? And I was at a very pivotal moment in my life. I had just graduated high school a little bit early, and my parents had always told us that they would pay, which this is a huge blessing to have somebody offer to pay your college, but they said, if you go to a Christian college, we will pay your full tuition. At the time, I had been traveling and looking at different colleges, but I hadn't settled on one fully. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And after I saw Heidi Baker, I decided this is it. I want to be a missionary. I want to do exactly what this woman is doing. And I want to dedicate my life to serving God. We are all riding this high. And I think another thing that people ask all the time is, and you'll see the crazier beliefs that come in later. You'll start to question where my sanity went. But I think one thing that's important to point out is the fact that when you are in a group of people who are all riding this high, it feels so normal. And this is a big thing about cults is groupthink. My family was also at this conference. A lot of them felt like they also saw personal breakthroughs, and we just wanted to know more about Heidi Baker. So we went back to my brother's apartment and we started looking her up. Who is Heidi Baker? And we saw that she had been featured in a documentary called The Finger of God. So if you don't know The Finger of God, it is a documentary by a man who claimed he was a skeptic. He said, I heard that miracles are happening today. I heard that people are saying that God is still performing crazy miracles and healings in today's day and age. And his goal with this documentary was to travel around the world and try to see if these miracles were real. And part of his documentary was visiting Heidi Baker in Africa. And another part of this documentary was visiting Bethel. And if you know me, you know Bethel is the cult that I ended up joining out in Redding, California. So in this documentary, they're talking about some of these crazier beliefs, and this is opening my eyes to the charismatic Christianity world. So he starts telling how some churches are claiming that gold teeth are appearing in people's mouths miraculously in the middle of church services. And he's showing it on film. He's saying, look, their tooth was normal before and now it's gold. So there was this belief that God would just give people gold teeth, which is kind of crazy. There was also this idea that gold dust was falling from the sky, that there are these things called glory clouds, which is basically a cloud of glitter and gold dust that can appear indoors. And these people would show their hands and there is just gold dust all over their hands. I am watching this documentary thinking, are you telling me that the world is not boring, that crazy stuff is still happening today, and that maybe people just need to be open to the miraculous signs and wonders that God is still able to do today? After I watched this, or while I'm watching it, I saw that Bethel was a part of this. So they had an entire section of this documentary and they showed their school called Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. Now, that sounds a lot like Hogwarts, and it kind of was. And it's a school out in Redding, California. And their whole thing is that they are building up revivalists because they think that Jesus is coming back. We need to bring heaven to earth. That is the big thing at Bethel. The leader, Bill Johnson, that's kind of his tagline. He has a book called When Heaven Invades Earth. And he believes that we can do everything that Jesus did. So we can heal people now. We can raise people from the dead. We should be attempting to bring God's goodness from heaven to earth right now and bring revival. And that revival is going to usher in the second coming of Christ. I decide I want to go to this Hogwarts type of school out in Redding, California. So when I get back from Abilene, this must have been so crazy for my parents because they had sent me off completely depressed, very suicidal, very lost. And when I came back, I was just on the top of the world. I was telling them, I'm going to be a missionary. I want to go to this ministry school out in California. And you have to think about it from their perspective. They didn't believe in any of this type of stuff, really. This was not their vibe. They were more just non-denominational, but they were so happy that I was a Christian. They were just happy that I was happy and that I wanted to be alive again, and that they saw a spark in me that they hadn't seen in a really long time. So for them, they were thinking, well, there are a lot worse things that our child could do than want to be a missionary. So they okayed it. And I started this process to apply for Bethel. And one thing that was also, I look back and I cringe so much. I had a high school boyfriend at the time, and I'm going to call him Ryan. And I had known him since, I think, kindergarten. We knew each other forever. We had been really good friends in middle school, and we had been dating for about a year at that point. And he was an atheist, which had never really bothered me before because I wasn't so religious at the time. I was going through a hard time and it wasn't like the most important thing to me. So I come back from Abilene and I am just so crazy, guys. I feel so bad for this guy, Ryan, because I was a completely different person. He must have been like, what happened to you? Because once I came back, it felt like we had nothing to talk about. All I wanted to talk about was this. And I don't know how to describe it other than it's borderline manic. I was like bouncing off the walls about Jesus, and I wanted to be at church all the time, and I wanted him to understand how much God wants to heal people. And then I tell him I want to join the supernatural ministry school, and we just kind of ended up realizing that we were not compatible anymore, which was really sad because we had a really good relationship, and then I just changed a lot. So we ended up breaking up, but I was excited to go to Bethel and just have this new life that I was excited to live, and I hadn't been excited for something in so long. So how do you apply to a supernatural ministry school? I was very anxious to do this. I had no idea what the process was really going to be like, but it ended up being very similar to what it would be for you to sign up for a mission trip. So they really just asked me, how did your relationship with God start? How long have you been a Christian? What do you believe? What are your core beliefs? And they did end up asking about purity. So at this point, I'm a little scared because I had been physical with my ex-boyfriend, and I was honest about that on the application. And I was hoping that that would not mean that I couldn't get into this very prestigious school. I ended up setting up my interview, and as I am talking to my interviewer, he is in his mid-20s, and he starts asking me some very personal questions. So he starts asking me, when is the last time that you slept with someone? When is the last time that you watched porn? When is the last time that you touched yourself? In hindsight, obviously I felt really uncomfortable. I felt really embarrassed, really shameful, but in hindsight, I realize how uncomfortable and not okay this is. If they were going to ask these sorts of questions, a woman 100% should have been the one who was going to interview me. So looking back, that is all kind of cringe, but I ended up getting in, except the only thing was that I had to make a purity plan. So I had to write up an entire thing saying what I was going to do for the summer to ensure that I stayed as pure as possible, and that I had to check in with this guy over the summer to let him know if I was following my plan. So I did find this plan recently, and it's super funny. In it, I am saying that I promise that I'm not going to hang out with a boy. I'm not going to text a boy unless it's for him to come to my Bible study that I started at my house. And I was using very holy language because I was really trying to impress this guy and let him know that I was serious about my purity. So the summer goes by, and I ended up getting in, and I passed my little purity test. So I went off to Redding, California, and it was with this road trip with my dad. It was very sweet. We drove up together, and it was the day that We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together from Taylor Swift came out. So for those of you who were around in that era, that is when this was going on. And as I am going up to Redding, I end up receiving a crazy email from someone I do not know. And in this email, it had been sent to, I think, like 1,200 other people. It was a lot of people. And in it, this person was saying that they were also supposed to be a student this year. They had arrived to Bethel a couple weeks ago, and they started to see some not so great things with theology, that Bethel was teaching things that was not in the Bible. And whenever these future students were asking, where is that in the Bible? Where are you getting this theology from? they really didn't have an answer, and they were pretty defensive about it. And basically, these students got a hold of everybody's email who was going to be an incoming student, and they sent out this mass warning telling everybody essentially that they believed that Bethel was a cult, or that at the bare minimum, we should all be very wary and to not be a student. And they ended up dropping out, and they went back home, and Bethel did respond to this email. They ended up sending messages to everybody saying, "We have been made aware that there was an email sent out, and obviously we do not agree with what was said about us. We cannot wait to see you." That was pretty much the extent of the email. And when I saw that, I was really stressed out. I had this gut feeling of, oh my gosh, what if this is true? What if this is a cult? And I didn't tell my dad because I knew that it might upset him, or maybe he would tell me that I couldn't go. And at this point, we had already paid for everything. I had already set up a roommate situation there, signed a lease. So I decided, I'm just going to hope that these people are wrong, and I'm going to continue to go to Bethel. So we arrive in Reading, we go to our first church service, and there was flag people. If you've ever been involved in these types of churches, you know what I'm talking about. They were dancing with flags on the stage, and there was prophetic artwork going on the stage, and it was just a completely different vibe than my church growing up. And my dad kept glancing over at me like, "Are you sure you want to be here?" He thought it was very strange, but I just told him I was so excited, and I moved into my apartment, and it was on Clay Street. So for any ex-Bethel students, you know Clay Street. It is one of the worst streets in Reading, and I ended up finding it because it was so cheap. I believe that my rent was $157, if I remember correctly, very specific. And I was going to be sharing a bedroom with another Bethel student. And Clay Street was notorious for just being filled with drugs, being filled with people who weren't homed, and you just had to be really careful on Clay Street. But in my mind, I was thinking, well, I'm just living the missionary life and I embrace it. So I move in, I meet my roommate, and for the most part, I liked my roommate. We became friends, but one thing that was funny was she was in the second year of the school, and I was obviously in the first year, and she felt like because of that, she had a motherly role over my life. So that was an interesting thing. She kind of felt like she could boss me around because she was 26 and I was 18. So just some very weird dynamics going on there. But overall, I was just very excited to start my journey at Bethel. So let me tell you guys a little bit about the school. The school was a Monday through Friday school. I think it was 5 hours a day, and you could either pick the morning schedule or the afternoon schedule. So we all had the middle of the day together, everybody, but you could either take your quote unquote electives in the morning, or you could take them in the afternoon, depending on your work schedule at Bethel. And one thing that was kind of crazy was over 50% of these students were not from America, because Bethel has a giant global reach. And so many of my friends were Norwegian, they were Swedish, they were Australian. Even my roommate was from England. So it was a very diverse group of people. So a lot of these people aren't working, which is fine. They weren't working because actually there was a huge job shortage. I feel really bad for the citizens of Reading because you have all of these students flooding into the city, taking up a bunch of jobs, and they were really struggling to find work. So I know that that is one thing that Reading people do not like about Bethel, is that all of their students take up all of their jobs. So going back to the school, we had worship a lot. Sometimes worship would go for hours and hours. They would keep it going if they felt like the Spirit was moving. And then we would have a Bible teacher come and speak, and we would have different electives throughout the school year. And then on top of that, we had this thing called activation. And activation is where we would go and serve the community on Thursdays. So you would try to pick which activation you wanted to do. There were many different ways that you could serve the city, and we all had to sign up and rank our top 3 places. So I signed up for my top 3 places. I didn't get any of them, and they ended up placing me in the least popular activation. And this activation was community service. So community service is where they give you one street for the entire year where you are supposed to go knock on doors and get them to come to Bethel or to get saved. And you can also do other things for them too. You can throw little block parties. You can offer to mow their lawn. But you have to imagine that these poor citizens are just having people knock on their door every Thursday. The same people. So the street that I got was this one little street where there was an apartment complex on one side and then just a bus stop on the other. And then at the very end of the street, there was a thrift store. And I had to go there every Thursday, and my people, my leaders, wanted me to knock on doors and try to pray for people. And I decided that I felt uncomfortable with that. They didn't love me, I will say, because I kind of pushed back on it and said, I don't really want to make people feel like a project. I feel like we are making them feel like a project and not seeing them as people. So one thing that I did was I saw a single mom and I knocked on her door during one of the first weeks, and I said, would it be okay if I babysat your kids every Thursday? And she agreed. She was really happy. I'm still friends with her on Instagram to this day. And I just babysat her kids every Thursday. We would play hopscotch. We would play tag. And my leaders really looked down on me for this because they thought that I should be praying for people or trying to convert people. But I just wanted to do something practical. That is kind of where I was at the time. But they really wanted me to do a treasure hunt. So I'm going to tell you guys what a treasure hunt is because it is a core part of Bethel culture. A treasure hunt is where you get in a group and you all stand around, you close your eyes, and you get out a piece of paper or you get your phone and you pray to God and ask him, God, who am I supposed to pray for today? Who am I supposed to go find out in the community? Who am I supposed to go find out at the mall, at Walmart? Who should I talk to? Who needs to hear your word? And then you might start to see a picture in your mind. You might see a yellow shirt. You might see a red hat. And then you would take your piece of paper and you would write these things down. And at the end, you go find them. So the whole purpose is that you are trying to find God's treasure, and you would go out into the community and kind of pester people. So this was a huge thing in Bethel culture. They believed that we should always be going out and trying to evangelize the community. And you would go up to them and you would say, hi, you are wearing a yellow shirt. Look at this piece of paper. I asked God, who am I supposed to talk to today? And he said yellow shirt. You are wearing a yellow shirt. So you are God's treasure. Can I please pray for you? And it would just be the same script over and over and over again. And we actually, Bethel, got banned from being able to do treasure hunts at Walmart because the Walmart managers got so upset that nobody was wanting to shop at Walmart because that was everybody's favorite place to go treasure hunting. And they actually told Bethel, hey, listen, we need you to stop telling your students to come here. It is not okay. And Bethel actually did listen. They told us on our first day of school that we were not allowed to treasure hunt at Walmart, but everywhere else was fair game. So that was a big part of Bethel culture. Some people had activations that were solely just treasure hunts in Reading. So I show up for my first day of school and I'm getting the lowdown on what the schedule is going to look like. And what was so crazy is another thing that Bethel really believed in was prophecy. And prophecy is essentially where God tells you something to tell another person. That is Bethel's explanation of it. So Chris Valton, the head prophet of Bethel, got on stage and he said, hey, I want everybody to turn to the person next to you and give them a prophetic word from God. And all of us are kind of looking around, especially me. I mean, maybe some people were raised in this culture, but I was not. I had never given a prophetic word in my entire life. I did not know how to hear God's voice. I didn't know how to tell if it was just my imagination or if it was God himself. And he said, give a prophetic word right now on the spot. And a lot of us were looking around uncomfortable. And he said, just do it. It was very forceful, no, you will do this. I don't remember what I said. I ended up giving a prophetic word. It was probably very general, like, I see a red heart and I just see you have a heart for people. I mean, it was probably something like that. And when we finished, everybody feels a little uncomfortable. And he says, okay, if you feel like you messed up, if you feel like you didn't know if that was from God or maybe you got it wrong, congratulations. You are one step closer to graduating, because I want everybody to, I want everybody's goal to be to get it wrong 3 times this year, because you're never always going to get it right. So he starts giving this kind of self-help talk saying that it's okay to get it wrong. It's okay to get prophetic words wrong, which if you read the Bible, that's actually not what it says. The Bible says that if you give a false prophetic word, you're a false prophet. But we were just taught just to say it, to step out in faith, even if you weren't sure it was God. So this culture in first year was a lot of students just stumbling around saying stuff, giving directional words, which was crazy when none of us really knew what we were doing. And we were just taught that any thought could be from God. So for example, if I were to talk to a leader and say, well, I don't know if that was my imagination, though. I don't know if it was my imagination or if that was God's voice. They would tell us that because you are saved and you accepted God into your heart, he has transformed your mind, which is a Bible verse they would quote about how God transforms our mind. And now we have the mind of Christ. And because you have the mind of Christ, your thoughts can be God's voice. That is what they taught us. They taught us that to not really second guess it, because your imagination could be God inspired. And they also believed that God is always talking. So what this means is that if they put me in front of Bobby and they say, give Bobby a prophetic word, and Jubilee says, I don't hear anything for Bobby, they would tell me, well, you're not listening good enough, because God always wants to speak to Bobby. God always has something to say to Bobby. And it turns into this very performative shame cycle where if you don't hear something, it's your fault. So you have a lot of students making things up because they don't want to be the student that isn't in tune with God's voice or isn't listening good enough. So you just have a lot of people, quote unquote, stepping out in faith and saying goodness knows what. And it is just a very crazy culture to be a part of. Another thing that was very big at Bethel was purity culture. So during our first year, we ended up having this week called Relationship Week. And they would talk about marriage, I don't know, just all of the general stuff. Marriage, respect your husband, have your eyes on God. But on the last day of Relationship Week, Chris Dalton, gets on stage and starts talking about purity. And as he is talking, he is saying how important it is that we save ourselves for marriage and how it is a covenant between a husband and a wife. And that is why it is so important that you don't have sex before marriage. And obviously I had heard this before, but I was feeling a lot of shame, as I do think a lot of other women were in that room, because I think a lot of us weren't virgins. And it really feels like the women were the ones who were experiencing this shame. And he started to tell this story about how back in the day, when a man and a woman would get married, they would go into a tent after the ceremony was over. They would consummate their marriage, and she would bleed for her husband all over a sheet. And then they would come out of this tent and show the bloody sheet to everybody who had attended the wedding. And it was supposed to be this beautiful covenant, a blood covenant with your spouse. And it's supposed to represent Jesus's blood covenant with us on the cross. So he's making all of these parallels and saying how beautiful it is to bleed specifically for your husband. And he started tearing up too. He was tearing up as if this is the most beautiful thing he's ever heard. And I remember thinking, is he wishing we still did this? Because he was speaking about it with such honor. And he said, I am going to pray right now that God is going to restore your hymen. Which I wish I was making this up, guys, but this is the type of culture that I was a part of for years. So he said, everybody close your eyes. I want all of the women who are not virgins to raise your hand. I believe that God is going to restore your virginity and that you are going to bleed for your husbands. That way you can experience the blood covenant through Christ. And what's so sad is now I look at this and I think it's so outlandish and ridiculous, and a lot of women don't even bleed. I never bled ever. And I know so many women in my life who also didn't, but I felt so much shame. And I remember raising my hand and truly praying that God would restore my body. And I was so serious about this. I really wanted him to. I felt so dirty. I felt so broken. And I remember thinking, God, are you really going to do this for me? Is my husband going to, so sad, is my husband going to get the best of me? So yeah, that was one crazy thing that happened when I was at Bethel. Spoiler alert, no. And another funny thing that he said too is he said that his inbox was filled with emails of people saying that their bodies had been restored on their wedding night. He said thousands of women have told me that their bodies have been restored. So he just had this very interesting fixation on purity. He had this entire ministry called Moral Revolution as well, which that is an entire rabbit hole, but that was just some of my first year. Another part of first year is this thing called revival groups. So revival groups are these groups that you're put in your first year that have about 60 people in them. So first year at Bethel, there was 1,200 students, which was actually a lot. And we all met in the Civic Center that Bethel had bought from the city. So it was pretty much their event center that they had for Reading. So we would meet there, and in my revival group, there were 60 people that I was grouped with, and I loved my revival group. I think it's so funny looking back on it. I think this culty place was absolute insanity, but my first year revival group was the highlight of my Bethel experience and probably the only good thing that I took from it, mostly because of the people. My revival group pastor, to this day, I still love her. We have remained in contact. We have talked quite a bit, and she has been really kind to me. I have shared my story on some podcasts, and she had caused me some hurt in my first year, which I'm not going to get into anymore because we actually talked it out because I had talked about it on the Something Was Wrong podcast, and she ended up listening to the Something Was Wrong podcast, reaching out to me and saying, hey, I really want to talk to you about the hurt that I caused. And I want to tell you where I was coming from. And she validated my feelings. And she's just a really great person. And yeah, she has been a bright spot of my Bethel experience. And I think that the reason why I continued on to second year was because my revival group pastor was so kind and our group was so healing, because I'm going to get emotional. What's crazy is I think that who I am today, the person that loves vulnerability, the person that loves telling stories, and just really values honesty, a lot of that comes from my first year pastor, because those are all of her core values as well. So in my first year, it was so self-help based. It really wasn't even biblical based. Looking back on it, it was not that churchy. It was more of a community of just really close friends. So we would share our deepest, darkest secrets with each other. And it was just a really safe place. And I'm still friends with a lot of people in my first year revival group to this day. A lot of them have also deconstructed, and we joke about how traumatic Bethel was, but we've been able to maintain those friendships, and I am so, so thankful for that. Yeah, so honestly, slay, that was a little great part of my Bethel experience. But now let's get into some of the weirder Bethel things, because at this point you might be thinking, okay, yeah, he prayed for women's hymens to be restored, but was there anything that crazy? Yes. Okay, so here we go. They believed in doing fire tunnels. So this is where you would get in two lines and someone would walk through the two lines, and as they are touching them, people would start manifesting, which essentially this means twitching. You would have people shouting. They'd be shouting, whoa. They'd be falling to the floor. They would be convulsing a lot. And sometimes people would fall to the floor and they would be there for hours, and they would have to be carried out of the sanctuary. So you would see people being overcome with the Holy Spirit, and we would do just fire tunnels all of the time. These things would break out at pizza shops, which was so cringe, guys. I was not a part of that, but I did see one happen one time. I was so embarrassed. Like I said, lots of speaking in tongues. I remember the first time I supposedly spoke in tongues, I was with my roommate and she said, you just have to start. You just have to start talking. You just have to start doing it. And tongues is supposed to be your holy language with God. It really just sounds like gibberish, but they believe that it is a true language between you and God. So I didn't know how to speak in tongues. My friend is saying, just open your mouth and go. Just go. So I did. And to this day, I really do think I sounded like Harry speaking to the snakes in Harry Potter. Unfortunately, I think when you're in these atmospheres and people are telling you that they're true, they are telling you, you're doing it. And you're thinking, am I doing it? Is this real? Am I making it up? And like I said, it's just a very interesting cult mindset where groupthink really comes into play. So speaking in tongues was another thing, manifesting on the floor. Yeah. And they also just believe that God always wanted to heal. That was another thing. Like I said, they believe that God was always talking. They believe that God always wanted to heal. So for example, if there is somebody with cancer who would come to Bethel, because Bethel did have the healing rooms that I ended up working at in my second year, they believed that if that person came to Bethel and if that person had full faith that they were going to be healed of cancer, then they would be. And it was always God's will to heal somebody from their sickness. And if you were not healed, it was your fault, because either one, you did not have enough faith, because the Bible says you only need the faith of a mustard seed, or you had unforgiveness in your life. So both put the blame on you for why you are not receiving your healing. So at Bethel, I kid you not, guys, it's so horrible to think back on. A lot of students would do these treasure hunts and go up to anybody who had crutches, who was in a wheelchair, anybody who looked ill, people on oxygen. Can I pray for you? And then they'd say, test it out. Do you feel better? Did your cancer go away? And it was pure insanity, because Bethel would say, continue to pray. So if I were to pray, they even gave you a script. If I were to pray and say, I believe God wants to heal you right now, let's pray. We would pray. And then I would say, on a scale of 1 to 10, does it feel better? How much better does it feel? If they said it felt the same, then I should say, okay, well, let's pray again. And you would do this over and over and over again. And you would be asking people, is it better? Is it better? Is it better? And they teach you to never give up, because it is God's will to heal this person. So you would see some crazy things happening at Bethel. They also believed in prophetic acts. So when it comes to healing, this might look like, if I'm praying for somebody and they're not healed of their cancer, or they still have back pain, I might say, I saw this vision. I saw a vision of you jumping over a belt. So all of a sudden somebody's taking off their belt. They're putting it on the floor and they're saying, I heard from God that you need to jump over this belt in real life, to show that through a metaphor that you are jumping over this chasm of unbelief. And if you jump over this belt, I believe that you are going to be healed. So you have a lot of people saying, do X, Y, and Z, and you will get your healing. And people are just making stuff up. And I know of people who spit in people's eyes. guys. I wish I was kidding. Who would take spit, put it in people's eyes of people who were blind. And they would say, God told me I need to spit in your eyes for you to be healed and you to regain your sight. And obviously you have these people who are desperate to be healed. So yeah, they would let you. So Bethel was really just a ginormous circus. In my first year, people were bouncing off the walls. And I think looking back on it, a lot of people, like I said, have said, how did you not realize how culty this was, that this place was absolutely crazy? Well, I don't know, guys. When everybody is saying it, it almost feels like it would be crazier to not believe it because you would be the one who's standing out. And it's easier to just think, well, this must be me. It must be because I don't have enough belief. It must be something like that. So guys, I don't even know how to describe it, but I was one of those people who was manifesting, who would twitch. There was a time where I had prayed to God and I said, I see all these people twitching. I see them manifesting in the spirit, getting slain in the spirit, where say someone touches you and they're filled with the spirit and you would fall to the floor. And Bethel would encourage this so much that they would have people behind people to catch them. You're almost expected to fall. And if you don't fall, maybe you're just not receptive enough. So there was a time where I prayed to God. I said, God, I really want to manifest because everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is twitching. Do you love them more than me? And I was starting to feel skeptical. I was starting to feel like, well, maybe everybody's faking it. So there was one time, and I swear, guys, I still don't know how to explain it. I'm sure some cult documentary could explain it pretty well. But it did happen to me where I started twitching and manifesting. I fell to the floor and I was on the floor with 30 other people and we are all laughing in the spirit. It was so weird. And it continued for 5 or 6 hours. And I remember towards the end of that, I had this thought that I didn't know if I was faking it. And it was so surreal because it felt real, but at the same time, there was this thing in my mind where I was like, am I faking this? Like, was it real when it started out and now I'm just keeping it going because I'm just doing this repetitive movement? It was very strange. And I told God, if this is real, if this is you, I need you to show me 100% that I'm not making this up. So that night I went to bed and I had a dream that I prayed for someone and that they got healed. And I woke up in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m, manifesting and twitching in my bed. I woke up to it. So like I said before, I want to be honest with you guys about some of the things that I experienced because it's easy to think, how did you not know? I had what I felt like was confirmation at the time that this stuff was legitimate. Obviously, now I have heard of studies of things that could have been happening in my body, how cult mindsets work. And I think that probably had a lot to do with it. But at the time, I just viewed everything I was going through as confirmation that this was 100% real. Okay, so I think it's time that I finally talk about Will. Will was my little love that I had from Norway. He was a very nice guy. I think when I met him, he was 27 years old and I was 18. So age gap, not great. Looking back, I do think that age gap is not great, but he was one of my best friends at Bethel. And we had really gotten close because he was in my revival group and he had this disorder where he was in pain all of the time. So he had pain shooting up his arms and it made it to where it was hard for him to get his schoolwork done. It was hard for him to maintain a job. And I just really connected with him because I felt so bad for him and had a lot of empathy for him. And we would talk about our fears and talk about our dreams. And we just had this very open and vulnerable relationship where we would share everything. So there were so many times where Will and I would be talking till 3 a.m. and we had not crossed any sort of boundaries until we did. So we ended up kissing. And I think my age really showed here because I really thought that we could make this work. I remember after we kissed, in my mind, oh my gosh, we're a couple. We're going to be together. And Will immediately was like, I don't actually know how this would ever work. And I want to, as they say, protect your heart. I don't know how this would work because of his illness, he knew that his country would never allow me to move there. And he wanted to go back to Norway. He did not like living in America. And he would have to prove to Norway that he could afford to bring me there, which he couldn't because he was not able to hold a full-time job because of his illness. So he was saying all of these very practical reasons of why our relationship would not work. And I was saying all of these reasons why, please, can we, like, true love can make anything happen. And my age, guys, was really showing here because I truly thought that we could just make it work. Who cares? We'll find a way. True love is everything. So we were really close at the time, but we ended up breaking up, although we were never fully together. This is my situationship. So we ended up separating for the summer, and we decided that we were just going to just be friends and kind of take space for the summer. During this time, my depression came back in full force. So trigger warning, but obviously, I thought that I had been healed of PTSD at this conference, and it does not really work that way. It did end up coming back. I was dealing with a lot of that trauma, and then on top of that, I was just feeling very lovesick and heartbroken over the Will situation. And I was in Reading alone for the summer. A lot of the students go back home to their home states or to their home countries during the summer. And I had very few friends around me at this time. And I just really started to feel depressed. And I started to think that maybe the reason Will doesn't want to be with me is because I'm fat. Okay. So I think a lot of women can relate to having these very sad thoughts of, well, it must be me. It must be my appearance. Maybe if I lost a bunch of weight, maybe if I just wasn't me, maybe I would be worth fighting for. So in my, at this point, 19-year-old brain, I decided that I was going to lose so much weight over the summer. I lived at the gym. I was barely eating. I lost 30 pounds in 2.5 months. I was truly unrecognizable by the time he came back. It was crazy how thin I had gotten when he got back. And my whole goal was Will's going to come back and he's going to realize how much he missed me and that he loves me and he wants to be with me. And at this time, like I said, I am still spiraling and not doing well. So I'm going to let you guys in on one of the darkest moments of my life, because it was really sad. And I think that it's where a lot of my religious trauma really started, is this summer, where I realized that I was still depressed and maybe I was still suicidal, because I would have flickers of these suicidal ideations. And I ended up getting on this app, and I ended up meeting some guy on this app. And to this day, I don't even know what I was thinking. All I know is that I was so depressed that I did not care if I lived or died. My mental health had declined so quickly. And I met up with this guy and I ended up sleeping with him. I went back to his house. He was in the military and I don't know, it was bad vibes. When I met him, I didn't feel safe with him. And I actually remembered thinking, I think that he might kill me, which it might sound dramatic, guys, but I really did think that there was a chance that this guy was dangerous. And I felt like I didn't care if I lived or died at that point, which just shows that my PTSD and my depression, it was still there. It was just under the surface for so long. And I ended up sleeping with him. And the whole time I was like, I don't even care if he ends up killing me. And yeah, that was a very, very low point in my life. Thankfully, he did not. And I've never shared this before publicly, but I looked him up recently. I think it was this last year. I looked him up and I found out that he is in jail for sexually assaulting a woman. So I was right in my thoughts that he was not a good person and that he was dangerous, which is really scary to think about. So while this is happening, after I had slept with him, I knew that I wanted to tell my new revival group pastor, because I was planning on doing my second year of school. And in fact, I was hoping to do all 3 years of the school. It's a 3-year program. So in my second year, I knew that I wanted to meet up with my new pastor, my new revival group pastor, and tell her what I had done over the summer. Because my first year pastor was, like I said, so incredible. She really drilled it into us. If there is anything that you think, if someone knew this about me, they would not love me. She said, if you have that fear, like, I challenge you to tell somebody what it is that you did, or what you feel shame about, what you think makes you unlovable, and let them love you. I think that that is so beautiful, and it works in the right setting. And what I did not realize was that my second year pastor was nothing like my first year pastor. So I'm going to call her Alyssa, my second year pastor. Meeting with Alyssa, I thought that she would be like my first year pastor, and I decided I'm going to just tell her what I did over the summer. So everybody had to meet with their second year pastor before the first day of school. So we set up a meeting, and I go into her office, and I just break down, guys. Like, I just remember crying and telling her, I really struggled this summer. I thought about taking my own life. I have just been in a really, really dark place. And at this point, I'm only 19 years old, and telling her how poorly I'm doing. And I said, I made a huge mistake, and I slept with this guy, and I didn't care if I lived or died. And I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you because I want to be honest with you. I don't want to keep any secrets from you, because I really thought that I was not allowed to have secrets in these sorts of atmospheres. You owe your leaders 100% of yourself. So as I'm telling her this, she is looking at me like she hates me. She looks so annoyed with everything I'm saying. She had so much judgment on her face, and she looked me in the eye and said, you are crying because you want me to feel bad for you, and I don't feel bad for you at all. And she said, and you are manipulating me, or you are trying to manipulate me. And it felt like she slapped me. Like, I have never experienced that much judgment and just distaste on her face towards me in my entire life. And I tried to explain to her, like, no, I'm not. I'm telling you this because I want to be honest, and I want to tell you what I did, because I don't want to hide things from you. I want to be an honest person. I want to be accountable. And she just looked at me and said, well, I'm going to have to talk to the leader and see if you can even stay, because you might get kicked out of school. So walking out of that meeting, I was at an even lower low. And I remember I called my dad. And I told him that I might be kicked out of school. And I called both my parents, and I told them, and they were so wonderful to me. They told me that they would have my back no matter what. And if this school kicked me out, then that was okay. And it was okay if they kicked me out, and that they had my back. And my dad said, you know what Bible verse I love the most? And I think about it every time I'm on a plane. And I asked him which one. And he said, I love looking out of the left window and the right window, and I think about how God casts our sins as far as the east is from the west. So my parents really loved me during that time. I'm so thankful for how they were so kind to me. Yeah, just like parents should be. They loved me unconditionally in that moment, and I think they gave me the support that obviously I was not getting from my second year pastor. So she ends up letting me stay in school. And that entire second year, this is already getting so long, my Bethel section, and this is just the beginning, but my second year was really hard. From then on out, it was just a bad year. My pastor was following me around the rest of the year. She was all on top of me, and she would ask me about if I was seeing anybody. They made me take an extra purity course that I had to pay for out of pocket to prove that I was really going to stay pure for the rest of the year. And it felt like I was walking on eggshells for the entire rest of the year. And second year at Bethel was similar to first year, but it had a vibe of leadership. So in first year, you're supposed to be built up to become a revivalist. And in second year, you're supposed to be learning how to be a leader. So you are supposed to lead the first years and you're supposed to know better by now. So all of this grace that was kind of extended, all of this, it's okay to mess up. It felt like that was gone in second year, that we should know better by now. We're supposed to be the leaders of the first years, and that I felt like I didn't have permission to be someone who was growing up. The ages of students at Bethel ranged from 17 to people in their 70s. There were people from all over the world of all ages. And in fact, some of my really good friends were in their 40s. So at this point, I'm hanging out with people who are a lot older than me, and we are being told that we are leaders, and that might feel appropriate for some of these people who are in their 40s. But I was a 19-year-old girl, and I was still trying to figure out who I was. I didn't feel that way, and it felt like a lot of pressure at that point, and I really crumbled under this pressure. So now let's get into how I low-key got blackmailed at the end of my second year. It's a doozy. So like I said, at this point, I was having a really hard time in my second year, and I had reconnected with Will in my second year. And he actually did tell me, "Oh my gosh, you look so good." So I felt like I had done what I needed to do for him to find me attractive. And during the beginning of the year, we weren't really talking that much, but towards the end of the year, we started to reconnect. So towards the end, we are talking, and we ended up kissing, and we ended up fooling around. And when I say fooling around, guys, what I really want to reiterate is that we did not have sex. We didn't even come close to that. The level of shame that existed at Bethel for any sort of contact was crazy. So here we are thinking we are the worst of the worst for fooling around a little bit. And at this point, I am thinking that God is out to punish me. God hates me because I felt that judgment from Alyssa. So that really bled into my relationship with God and how I viewed God. So I remember that there was one time after I had fooled around with him that I was supposed to go on a road trip that week, and my car ended up breaking down the morning of the road trip. Like, I could not get this thing to start. And I broke down sobbing in my car, and I was like, God broke my car because I'm a whore. And when I tell you guys that I really thought that God sabotaged my road trip with my friends. We were just going to go to the beach, that God sabotaged my road trip because he hated me. And that is just kind of how I viewed God and leadership at the time. I just really thought that I was worthless. So during the end of our second year, Will and I are sitting outside of his apartment, and he feels really guilty about what we did. And we're sitting outside of my car. So we're sitting on the gravel outside of his apartment complex. And I think it was 11 or 12. So it was really late at night, and we're sitting there talking, and he tells me that he wants to go tell Alyssa what we did. And this is 2 weeks before graduation. And I had already decided that I was going to do my third year in a different state, which I'll get into how that works in a little bit. But I had already decided that I wasn't going to stay in Reading for my third year. So I told him, please, can we please just graduate? Can I please just get out of here? You know, I didn't really see the point, and I was afraid that they weren't going to let me graduate if they found out what had happened. So I'm crying to him, and I'm telling him, please, please, I know I'm a whore. I know I'm disgusting. I know I'm terrible. And I started to have a panic attack, and I just kept repeating over and over again that I was a whore. And that was a really low moment for me because I really believed it. And looking back now, it might be crazy to comprehend that that's how I felt, because those of you who know me from online, I am the biggest purity culture hater, like certified purity culture hater. I hate it with everything in me. And it's sad to me that at 19 years old, I was really so brainwashed to believe that my worth was really gone because of the bad decisions that I had made, or so I was told. And I cried to him, and we agreed that we were going to talk about it in the morning. So the next morning I wake up and I got a call from Will, and Will told me that somebody that we did not know, a third-year student, had knocked on his door that morning and said, "Hey, I heard you last night talking to that girl." And what is so crazy is this guy opened his window and listened to our hour-long conversation about how terrible we felt about what we had done. And he said, "I heard what you and that girl were talking about last night. And if you don't go tell your revival group pastor, I'm going to go tell her what you guys did." So we were cornered, and we ended up doing that. And we went and we told her, and it was traumatic. And it really just rounded out my Bethel experience, I will say. And it was a dark time in my life, and I was so ready to just get out of this culture. So Will and I knew at this point that we weren't going to be together. I've never shared this before, but we had like one night before he left where we just sat in the car and talked until I think you're like 5 or 6 in the morning before I drove him to San Francisco to drop him back off. That way he could go to Norway. And we just like held each other and cried. And I just remember crying, and I was saying, "We're not going to be together, are we?" And he said, "No, we're not." And it was just very sad and kind of a very somber way to end my Bethel experience in Reading itself. So I was so ready to get out of there. I felt like I had my heart broken. And I decided that I was going to intern for Georgian and Winnie Banov. Now, if you know Georgian and Winnie Banov, they are from Bulgaria, and he basically escaped during the height of conflicts that were going on there. And he used to be a rock star. So he was a rock star over in Bulgaria. He came here to America, and his whole thing was playing his violin. So he would come out to Bethel and play his violin, and he was kind of a musical minister. And he was all about joy. His entire message was the joy of Jesus, just being happy in Christ. And for me, I was really drawn to him because I probably didn't explain that very well, but your third year is supposed to be your internship. So your third year is where you go and intern for some sort of leader, whether that be someone like Heidi Baker or Georgian Banov, or you could also intern for the school to be a leader in the school. So when I was trying to figure out who I was going to intern for, I decided I wanted to intern for Georgian Banov because he just seemed fun. And I ended up moving out to Pennsylvania. He had a school out there in Harrisburg, and it was called Global Celebration School of Supernatural Ministry. And oh my goodness, guys, I thought that this school was going to be like Bethel. And I think what's funny about Bethel that I forgot to mention is that it was so hip. Bethel, like, it's full of a bunch of hipsters, a bunch of really cool, down-to-earth type of people. And you don't feel like you're in a cult while you're there just because everybody seems really chill and nice. And when I moved out to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, when I went to, it's called GCSSM, Global Celebration School of Supernatural Ministry, I felt like, oh my gosh, this place is so weird because it was a much smaller school. I was thinking that it was going to be another relatively big school. Bethel had, I think, 1,700 students total when I first arrived there. And this school in Pennsylvania only had, I believe, 60 students. So it was significantly smaller. A lot smaller, and it was being hosted by a local church called Life Center, which is actually a pretty big church. So I show up to Harrisburg. I packed all my bags. I moved out there thinking that there were going to be other Bethel interns because a lot of these other internships, there's at least 2 or 3. But turns out I was the only intern that had moved out there. So I felt really alone when I first got there and kind of scrambling, trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this year work? So I ended up moving in with a lady. She let me live there if I was nannying her kids. So I lived there for a couple months. And when I arrived to the school, I was told that my first assignment as the Bethel intern was that I needed to write a prophetic word for every single incoming student without ever having met them. And this was Georgian's request. So they gave me a list of students through email, and they said, here are the names of all of the students that are going to be here this next year, and you need to write them a prophetic word. I had been giving prophetic words at Bethel, but obviously I still had my doubts sometimes of, was that me or was that God? But a lot of the time, and I'm going to be so honest, guys, I would pick up on people's energy. I would pick up on, I don't know, just whether their warmth or how they seemed. And when I was just given a list of names, I felt like I had nothing to go off of. And I was so nervous to do this. And I remember sitting at a Starbucks and just staring at these names and feeling like a complete fraud. I felt horrible about myself. I felt like I was making things up. I had a lot of very general prophetic words like, I see a building block and I just believe that God is going to build you into the person that you're going to be. And there was so much pressure to live up to what Georgian wanted from me. And it was scary. So I ended up doing it. And after that, I quite literally never gave another prophetic word because I was so burned from the prophetic, and I was really starting to question if I felt like it was real. At least for me, I think I did believe in the true prophets. I still believed that God spoke through people, but I wasn't convinced that it was real for me or that I had that gift. So that was my first task with my internship. And little did I know that one of those prophetic words that I was giving out was going to be for my future husband. I ended up meeting my future husband, Ted, the first week that I arrived in Harrisburg. I definitely did not see it coming, as you guys will hear in the story. I know I've shared so much about Ted, so much about him on social media. I feel like a lot of you guys know a lot of my TED stories. I have more though, guys. Okay. I did not tell you guys all of everything that I went through in that marriage, and I'll try to give you guys a little bit more backstory on here. But this is where I met Ted, and I think I met him at the welcome desk. He was a janitor at the school. So imagine I am 20 years old at the time, and I meet this guy, Ted, and he is 30 years old. So despite the fact that pretty much everybody in these ministry schools is looking for their spouse, I did not view Ted as a potential mate. One, because I was not super attracted to him, but also he seemed outside of my age range. He was 30 and he looked 30, if not older. So I really just did not think of him in that way. The second time I met Ted was at the conference that they were hosting at Life Center. I ended up showing up. It was the week before school and I was still getting settled in the area. And he ended up coming up to me and saying, can I give you a prophetic word? Which this was so common at Bethel and these affiliated type of churches where they would say, you know, God just put something on my heart. And I said, sure. And I remember that he gave me some sort of prophetic word that had to do with a flower. It didn't really feel like much to me. I didn't feel connected to the word in my spirit or anything like that, but he just seemed very outgoing, very sweet. He was a janitor at the church and he was known to be one of the best people at the school. So as soon as the school started, people started telling me about Ted, and he would run the monitors in the back. So he would be the ones who would put the words on the screen during worship and do the slides. So he was very helpful to Georgian, and I found out that the year before they had done some sort of popularity contest at the end of the year, and they had voted on who was the best student at the school, and Ted had won. So he was the most loved. I need you to think class president kind of vibes. He was just known to be very selfless. He would always stay late, help close up, and his life was helping Georgian and just helping this ministry. That is all I knew about Ted at the time. Now we are going to meet Sarah. So Sarah was this girl who had reached out to me on Facebook, and she was a second-year student at Georgine and Winnie School. Sarah reached out to me and told me that she knew that I was new to the area and that she wanted to welcome me. So we ended up going and getting Dunkin' Donuts or something like that and just having a welcome meeting together. And we didn't particularly hit it off. Like, it was fine, but we didn't end up being friends throughout the rest of the year. But I did hear through the grapevine that Sarah and Ted had dated the last year. So I did know that there was a bit of romantic history in there. And please remember this. This is very important, that Sarah had dated Ted. And I promise that is going to be important later on. So as the year was going on, this again was just not fully what I was expecting it to be. My first housing ended up falling through. So I ended up moving into this ministry house, which I was so thankful to get into because I had nowhere to stay. And I had ended up getting invited to move into this house with other ministry school students. And I lived with two guys and a married couple. And it was in this very old house in downtown Harrisburg, and it was a very rough side of town. So I often heard gunshots going off. It was kind of scary, to be honest, and not the best place to live, but I was just happy that I had found a place to stay. And in my mind, I was still viewing it, I'm a missionary. So if I'm suffering, that's good because I am supposed to suffer for God. And I was sleeping on an air mattress, just had very little furniture at this time because the first place that I had stayed at, I was staying in a fully roomed place, or a fully furnished place. So here I am. I have like my little containers from Walmart. And during this time, I ended up getting a job at a diner. And this diner was crazy, guys. I have some crazy stories from the diner, but I also am thankful for that time of my life. I did meet some really cool people who I'm still connected with, but I worked the night shift at this diner. So I used to work this 10 p.m. to 6 in the morning shift because that is the only thing that would work with my ministry schedule. So while I am doing this, I am so tired, obviously. And a lot of the patrons who would be coming in were really drunk. They would be really, really drunk. They'd come in after the bars. So I got a lot of those sorts of people. And I remember one time there was a full out brawl at 3 a.m. So a brawl of 17 people. They started throwing chairs, breaking tables. I had to run to the back and call the police. There was no managers there at the time. It was just me. I was a hostess. And it was just a very wild time of my life. I did want to share a little foreshadowing story that I have because I don't think I've shared it before. And given how my life ended up turning out, I think it's interesting that this happened when I was in Harrisburg. But while I was working at this diner, there was this girl and she ran into the diner at, I think it was 1 or so in the morning, and she was just panting. She seemed like she had been running, and she said, "Can I sit here?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And she's standing by my host table, and I lead her to a booth, and she's sitting there, and she said, "Please, just let me sit here for a minute. I promise, I don't need to be here for long." And I could just see that something was really, really wrong when I was speaking with her. So we were really slow. So I went and I sat at the booth with her and I started talking and asking, what's going on? What's wrong? And she told me that her boyfriend had strangled her and she had bruises on her neck. I could see them as I was speaking to her. And my heart just broke for her. She seemed so scared and so lost. And she said that she'd ran out of the house and ran all the way to the diner. I'm getting emotional, but, she ran to the diner and I ended up telling her, you can stay here. You can stay and just let's hang out. So we ended up talking for a couple hours and I told her, if you want to stay till 6 a.m, I'll drive you home. I can take you to your mom's house. And she said yes. So she ended up staying till I got off my shift, and then I took her home and we remained in contact for a while. And I just find that story so crazy given what ended up happening to me. Obviously, we are going to get there. But I never thought that I was going to be someone who would relate to her story so much. I never thought that I would see myself in her experience, but I definitely would as time went on. And I think that this is where I'm going to end part 1, because I am just about to get in a relationship with Ted. And as you guys know, that is just a series of unfortunate events. And trust me, we have barely scratched the surface. It is a long story and I want to do it justice. So I will be back tomorrow with part 2, where we will dive even deeper into the mess, the unraveling, and the moments that changed everything. Thank you guys so much for being here and for listening. This is Healedish, and this is just the beginning.